Cenjene kolegice in kolegi, v čast mi je, da danes otvorim tole zelo lep simpozij, ki vidim, da je to zelo obiskan in kavačen notam, kar se bo zanimeni mladi. In v tem trenutku bi kar prepustil prvi nagovor gospoda direktorja.
Hvala lepa. Spoštovani direktor Javne agencije za raziskovalno dejavnost Republike Slovenije, dr. Jožef Gerkeš, cenjeni svojci direktorja Janka Jamnika, dragi gostje, spoštovane sodelavke in sodelavci Kemijskega inštituta. Zelo sem vesel, da bo danes, na današnji dan, minil v znamenju nečesa izjemno pozitivnega. V okviru praznovanja 70-letnice delovanja Kemijskega inštituta smo pripravili še en dogodek, prvi simpozij za mlade znanstvenice in znanstvenike, ki smo ga poimenovali po bivšem direktorju profesor dr. Janku Jamniku in ki poteka pod častnim pokroviteljstvom predsednika Republike Slovenije Boruta Pahorja. Z organizacijo simpozija bi radi spodbudili mlade k odločitvi za ukvarjanje z znanostjo. Kljub temu, da to v trenutnih razmerah ni lahko, bomo s primeri ambicioznih, uspešnih, mlajših znanstvenic in znanstvenikov z Kemijskega inštituta pokazali, da se v Sloveniji da pisati uspešne znanstvene zgodbe, ki so v svetu prepoznani kot odlične. Simpozij bo prežet spominom na profesorja Janka Jamnika, ki je bil izjemen znanstvenik in njegovo delo na inštitutu zelo cenjeno. Dejstvo je, da je pustil izjemen znanstveni in osebni pečat na Kemijskem inštitutu, pri tem pa je njegova podpora mladim tisto, kar na Kemijskem inštitutu odmeva vsak dan. Še posebej nas veseli, da se je simpozijo lahko udeležil profesor dr. Joachim Mayer z Max Planck Institute for Solid State Research iz Stuttgarta v Nemčiji. Dear Professor Mayer, I would like to thank you for coming to Ljubljana and to honor us with your presence at this first symposium for young scientists. Thank you very much. Profesor Mayer je častni član Kemijskega inštituta, ki z inštitutom sodeluje že vrsto let in bo v svojem predavanju vrisal sodelovanje tudi s profesor Jamnikom in pomen in kvaliteto njegovega znanstvenega dela. Po svojem znanstvenem delu bo spregovoril tudi docent dr. Boštjan Genorijev, ki je bil doktorski študent profesor Jamnika in sedaj svojo znanstveno pot uspešno nadaljuje na Fakulteti za kemijo in kemijsko tehnologijo Univerze v Ljubljani. V okviru današnjega dogodka bomo predstavili tudi prvo štipendijstvo Kemijskega inštituta in delovanje sklada Janka Jamnika za iskrive mlade v znanosti. Zaključno besedo bi rad namenil našim mladim kolegicam in kolegom, ki ste si danes vzeli čas in se boste udeležili tega simpozija. Upam, da boste v teh pripravljenih predavanjih uživali in da boste našli navdih za vaše nadaljnje znanstveno udejstvovanje na Kemijskem inštitutu in drugih inštitucijah sveta. Hvala lepa.
Nadaljujemo z našim častnim gostom danes in prosim profesor Gerkeša za nagovor.
Hvala lepa. Spoštovane gospe in gospodje, udeleženke in udeleženci Jamnikovega simpozija za mlade v znanosti. Resnično se štejemo čast, da vas lahko pozdravim v imenu Javne agencije za raziskovalno dejavnost Republike Slovenije. Večplastnost tega dogodka je nedvomna. Spominom na cenjenega profesorja dr. Janka Jamnika na Kemijskem inštitutu utirate pod skladu, ki bo namenjen mladim doktorantom in doktorantkam. V Republiki Sloveniji spodbujanje znanosti preko skladov ni povsem neznano. Pri tem naj omenim delovanje Slovenske znanstvene fundacije v preteklosti in danes, vendar je ta mehanizem še vedno premalo prisoten. Ocenjujem, da skladi in mecenstva tvorijo zelo neposredne in dolgoročne povezave med donatorji in prejemniki štipendij. Kriteriji podeljevanja, ki temeljijo na odličnosti in prebojnosti idej štipendistov, ki se bodo zvrstili v okviru Jamnikovega sklada v prihodnosti, bodo zanesljivo vplivali na že prisotno predanost mentorskemu delu in povezanost Kemijskega inštituta z drugimi inštitucijami znanja in z gospodarstvom. Ob izteku vročega poletja, na koncu meseca avgusta, smo bili predstavniki agencije in pristojnega ministrstva povabljeni na Kemijski inštitut predstavitvi rezultatov presoje inštituta strani mednarodnega znanstvenega in razsvetovalnega odbora. Gospod direktor, dr. Gregor Anderluh in predsednik znanstvenega sveta, dr. Robert Dominko, sta nam podrobno predstavila rezultate presoje eminentnih mednarodnih presojevalcev, ki so bili seveda spodbudni. Med rezultati so bile posebej poudarjene tudi dejavnosti za razvoj mladih, ki presegajo sicer nujne konvencionalne učne in raziskovalne dejavnosti za mladih. Ustanovitev in delovanje sklada Janka Jamnika nedvomno presega konvencionalnost. Kot je v poslanstvu sklada zapisano, naj bi ob spodbujanju mladih znanstvenic in znanstvenikov omogočali tudi še boljše povezovanje z raziskovalci v tujini. Ob tem se z veseljem in zaradi kasnejših dogodkov z grenkobo spomnim obiska profesorja Jamnika na agenciji takoj po nastopu mojega mandata v mesecu novembru leta 2014. Poudarek njegovega obiska je bila skrb za mlade, omogočanje pretočnosti raziskovalcev v vse smeri, zmanjševanje administrativnih omejitev in bremen, skratka vse, kar bi prispevalo k neoviranemu izražanju svežih idej in odličnih znanstvenih dosežkov. Pri pripravi sprememb v sistemu vrednotenja in spremljanja raziskovalne dejavnosti, ki smo jih na agenciji izvedli v zadnjem letu in pol, smo se trudili zajeti tudi omenjene predloge. Spremembe v velikih sistemih, kot je znanstveno-raziskovalna dejavnost, morajo biti premišljene, saj imajo dolgoročni učinek v dobrem in v slabem pomenu. Vse bežno, vendar dovolj jasno moramo ponovno poudariti, da financiranje znanosti zaostaja. Priznati moramo pozitiven trend za področje znanosti v državnem proračunu v zadnjih 2 letih in hkrati izraziti upravičeno pričakovanje po približevanju ciljem raziskovalne in inovacijske strategije v Sloveniji do leta 2020. Spoštovane gospe in gospodje, skladu in seveda vsi, ki delate v okviru sklada Janka Jamnika, želim uspešno delovanje in si želim, da bi bil zgled tudi drugim raziskovalnim ustanovam, vključno z univerzami. Želim si, da bi služil tudi kot zgled podpornikom in mecenom znanosti, naj se bodo gospodarske družbe ali posamezniki. Naj ne zveni obrabljeno, naložba v znanost je naložba v prihodnost. Hvala lepa.
Direktor nam bo predstavil delovanje sklada Janka Jamnika in obenem bo razglasil prejemnico štipendije sklada Janka Jamnika za spremljanje mednarodne znanosti za letošnji let.
Spoštovani, dovolite mi, da najprej predstavim sklad Janka Jamnika za iskrive mlade v znanosti. Sklad smo ustanovili na pobudo družine profesor dr. Janka Jamnika in zaradi zaveze Kemijskega inštituta, da nadaljujemo njegovo delo povezano z mladimi. Sklad je namensko oblikovan znotraj Kemijskega inštituta in deluje v okviru inštituta. Namenjen je podpori odličnim mladim znanstvenikom. Skrbeli bomo, na primer, da se jim zagotovi lahko podpora pri obetavnih projektih ali udeležbi na mednarodnih šolah, konferencah ali tekmovanjih, da se vključuje tuje mlade raziskovalce v delo inštituta, da se pomaga pri ustanovitvi in delovanju novih mladih raziskovalnih skupin in tako naprej. Sklad se je do zdaj oblikoval iz sredstev 62 donatorjev. Med njimi je 45 domačih fizičnih oseb, 6 tujih fizičnih oseb in 11 domačih pravnih oseb. Do 3. novembra 2016 se je v skladu nabralo 10.713,73 evrov. Ta sredstva so se zbirala na posebnem kontu Kemijskega inštituta, o njihovi porabi pa je odločila komisija, sestavljena iz direktorja Kemijskega inštituta, profesor dr. Gregorja Anderluha, predsednika znanstvenega sveta, izrednega profesorja dr. Roberta Dominka in pomočnika direktorja gospoda Mitja Črnilja. Iz sklada so se letos prvič črpale sredstva in sicer se jih je okoli 75% namenilo omenjeni doktorski štipendiji Janka Jamnika za perspektivnega mladega raziskovalca in raziskovalka z področja kemije in sorodnih ved, 25% pa za udeležbo na tekmovanju sintezne biologije International Genetic Engineering Machine, kjer je večkrat nagrajena skupina študentov pod vodstvom profesorja doktorja Romana Jerala, se bo udeležila tega tekmovanja konec oktobra in bo potekalo v Združenih državah Amerike. Vizija Kemijskega inštituta je, da sklad dinamično deluje, da vsako leto znova štipendijami in projekti dokazuje in potrjuje poslanstvo njegove ustanovitve. Tako kot smo na inštitutu ambiciozni in resni pri našem raziskovalnem delu, tako bomo odgovorno in predano razvijali in gradili tudi ta sklad. Ima pomembno sporočilo znanosti za družbo, mladi znanstveniki v slovenski družbi potrebujejo polnomočenje in veseli smo, če smo na Kemijskem inštitutu pri tem res lahko proaktivno delujoči. Hvaležni smo vsem osebnim in poslovnim donatorjem, ki so v sklad donirali in prispevali sredstva in v tej priložnosti bi se v imenu inštituta vsem zares lepo zahvalil. Hvala. Iz sklada bomo torej del sredstva namenili pri prvi doktorski štipendiji, ki jih bomo podelili na Kemijskem inštitutu. Glavni namen te štipendije je zaposlitev mlade perspektivne študente ali študenta, ki bo upravljal raziskovalno delo pod vodstvom izvrstnega mentorja, v okviru raziskovalnega programa inštituta usposabljal kot mladi raziskovalec in najpozneje v roku 4 let pridobil naziv doktorja znanosti. Vse te aktivnosti bo štipendist opravljal v okviru redne zaposlitve na Kemijskem inštitutu, v času usposabljanja pa ima tudi možnost kratkega usposabljanja v tujini, udeležbe na konferencah in podobno. Štipendija tako pokriva vse navedene stroške, ki se bodo kot rečeno pokrivali iz sklada Janka Jamnika za izkrive mlade v znanosti, direktorjevega sklada in tudi drugih virov. Letošnjo štipendistko smo izbrali na podlagi javnega razpisa, na katerega smo prejeli lep odziv. V izbirnem postopku je na osnovi življenjepisa kandidatov s poudarkom na študijskih uspehih ter eseja na eno od aktualnih tem, s katerimi se na inštitutu ukvarjamo, izbrala posebna komisija sestavljena iz uglednih raziskovalcev Kemijskega inštituta, ki je imenoval znanstveni svet in je pristojna za podelitev Preglove nagrade za izjemno doktorsko delo. S 3 najbolje ocenjenimi kandidati smo potem opravili še razgovor, kjer so se vsi kandidati odlično odrezali, najbolje med njimi pa izbrana kandidatka. Letošnja in hkrati prva štipendistka iz Jamnikovega sklada je Sabina Kolar, ki jo zdaj lepo povabim na oder, da predstavim njeno sedajno pot. Sabina Kolar je na Fakulteti za kemijo in kemijsko tehnologijo Univerze v Ljubljani diplomirala avgusta 2012 na temo cianobakterij pod mentorstvom izrednega profesorja dr. Marka Dolinarja. Takoj zatem je seveda nadaljevala z magistrskim študijskim programom iste smeri. Za same študijske uspehe je bila strani fakultete nagrajena za najboljšega študenta letnika biokemije za leto 2012-2013. Z drugim letnikom magistrskega programa je odšla na študijsko prakso v Nemčijo, kjer je pod mentorstvom profesor dr. Borisa Roglja na Inštitutu za raziskave na matičnih celicah na Filmpol-centrum München v laboratoriju dr. Miše Drukarja pravila raziskovalni del magistrske naloge. Kot dobitnica štipendije sklada Ota Likarja je v tem laboratoriju preživela skoraj leto dni. S svojimi rezultati se je znanstvenim plakatom septembra 2015 predstavila na 2 konferencah, letni konferenci Nemškega združenja za matične celice v Frankfurtu in na konferenciji FEPS3 plus molekule življenja, ki je bil organiziran v Portorožu. Naslednjem se je bila skupaj z delovnim mentorjem Miho Mozicom za plakat tudi nagrajena. Magistrirala je septembra 2016, s poprečno oceno upravljenih izpitov 9,6, pa tu pa svojo znanstveno kariero nadaljuje na Kemijskem inštitutu. Kot direktor naj še iskreno povem, da sem res zadovoljen in ponosen, da bomo znanstveniki tukaj na Kemijskem inštitutu pridobili tako odlično nadajeno, zavrženo, zavzeto, ambiciozno sodelavko in bomo tako dodali drobec nekega novega znanja v zgodbo odličnosti delovanja našega inštituta. Prosim, še predsednika znanstvenega sveta.
Ja, je ena taka zelo posebna čast biti prva prejemnica štipendije iz sklada Janka Jamnika, še posebej pa zaradi Mina Samba, ki ga štipendija nosi. Štipendija sem absolvira. Veselim se čudcem dela in raziskovanja na Kemijskem inštitutu. Se pa pač hkrati zavedam, ker sem prva štipendijska tudi ene take posebne odgovornosti, ampak verjamem, da bomo z enim trdim delom pač to tudi uspešno upravičili.
Mogoče, če še jaz lahko dodam, Sabina se bo pridružila v odseku za kemijo materialov. Skupaj bomo delali na baterijah, praktično nadaljevala bomo delo tisto, kjer je pokojni Jamnik tudi nehal. V naslednjem nadaljevanju tega jutranjega druženja nam je veliko čas tudi, da predstavimo posebno izdajo Akte kemike Slovenike. To je v bistvu izdaja revije, slovenske revije, ki smo jo skupaj s uredniškim odborom, na pobudo profesora Pejovnika in z skrbnim delom celotnega uredniškega odbora, ki je bil sestavljen iz docenta Genorija, mene in profesora Pejovnika. V bistvu danes lahko predstavimo to posebno izdajo Akte kemike Slovenike. Ta številka je posvečena profesor Janku, svetovno poznanemu raziskovalcu. Bil je cenjen kolega, mentor in nazadnje tudi direktor Kemijskega inštituta, ki je izdatno zaznamoval napredek znanosti v bližnji in širši okolici, predvsem pa pri nas samih. V njegov spomin je 16 različnih posameznikov privolilo, da prispeva svoje znanstvene prispevke v to posebno izdajo. In tako smo izbrali 13 znanstvenih referatov in 3 pregledne članke. Objavljena dela se dotikajo različnih obdobij Jamnikovega znanstvenega raziskovalnega dela. Znanstvena dela so posvečena njegov spomin in so objavili kolegi profesor Joachim Mayer iz Stuttgarta, Max Planck inštituta, potem slovenski kolegi, pa tudi kolegi recimo iz kitajske znanstvene iz Kitajske akademije znanosti, iz Collège de France, Tehnične univerze na Danskem, Univerze na Dunaju, Univerze v Minstru, Jožef Štefan inštituta in nazadnje tudi Ljubljanske univerze. Vsi odgovorni avtorji so tako ali drugače povezani z Jamnikovim delom v različnih obdobjih njegovega znanstvenega ustvarjanja. Na koncu bi se rad zahvalil celotnemu uredniškemu odboru Akte kemike Slovenike, ne samo tem odboru, ki je pač delal na tej posebni izdaji, temveč tudi za posluh uredniškega odbora, da nas je v bistvu sprejel v posebno izdajo, kot tudi predsedniku Kemijskega društva, ki je podprl v bistvu vsa ta naša prizadevanja in omogočil to izdajo. In s tem smo ovekovečili spomin na našega cenjenega kolega ter direktorja in v bistvu tudi rad bi se zahvalil direktorju za organizacijo današnjega dogodka, kjer lahko to v bistvu interviramo. Sedaj bi pa prosil profesor Pejovnika, da nekaj pove o Janezovem delu splošno.
Hvala, Robert. Pozdravljeni, gospod direktor, predsednik Slovenskega kemijskega društva. Saša, posebno zahvala tudi tebi za pripravo, pomoč pri pripravi te številke. Danes sva tukaj dva, Nemci bi rekli, doktor Pater Janeza, manjka tretji, to je Peter Prelovšek, ki je na fiziki v Ljubljani bil upravljal praktično vso vlogo mentorja na univerzi in vsi trije smo nedvomno zelo ponosni na to, kaj je Janez dosegel potem, ko je doktoriral. Odločil sem se, da bom danes spregovoril nekaj besed o Janezu kot človeku, kot Janeza kot znanstvenika zelo dobro poznati. K meni je prišel pred 35 in 36 leti, ko sem bil asistent na fakulteti za kemijo, Janez pa dijak Bežigrajske gimnazije v drugem letniku. prišel k meni in rekel, gospod profesor, takrat sem bil sam tovariš asistent, in me poprašal, če bi mu bil pripravljen pomagati pri izdelavi celice metanol zraka. Iskreno povedano, niti nisem prav veliko vedel tej celici takrat. In me pa presenetilo, da mlad dijak tako s takšnim zanimanjem in s takšnim zanosom pride za neko idejo. In jasno je bilo, da je iskrica preskočila tisti hip in da se je vključil v delo kemijskega laboratorija. Zanimivo je, da je ves čas bil izjemno trd pristaš fizike. Zato se je med nama, pa kasneje tudi med kolegi, Miran, pogosto razvijala debata, kakšne so načini raziskovanja na fiziki, kakšne so načini raziskovanja na kemiji, zakaj fizika zna vse povedati v primernih matematičnih oblikah, zakaj smo kemiki zadovoljni z bolj poenostavljenimi pristopi. Vse te debate so bile zelo konstruktivne in so v principu stremele k temu, da smo delali na modelih. Leta 1985 smo na tem inštitutu ustanovili laboratorij za kemijske izvore električne energije. Takrat smo delali na sistemu litij-tionit-turin. Tukaj imam dve bateriji litij-tionit-turin, ki so bile narejene v tistem času. Obe še danes delujete. In Janez, Miran, Robert malo kasneje, Marjan Biletov, so bili tisti, so sestavljali, po mojem mnenju, takrat najbolj interdisciplinarno skupino na inštitutu. Vse smo imeli zraven še elektrotehnika Damirja in skratka, videli smo, da lahko vse to naredimo samo, če delujemo ljudje iz zelo različnih področij. In ta različnost v teh področjih se je kazala tudi v zelo različnih pristopih k stvari. Ampak ena stvar pa nam je bila skupna. In nam je skupna še danes. Vedno smo želeli delati nekaj novega. Vedno. In to je bilo osnovno gibalo. Hoditi po neznanih poteh. In seveda po možnosti pustiti sled, kar je že malo težje. In Janez, lahko mama njegova potrdi, je že kot zelo mlad manj prej, preden je sploh šel v šolo, si sam z očetovo pomočjo naredil avto. In kot otrok, ko se je s tem lesenim doma, pravzaprav je sam naredil ta avto, je vsem na vasi razlagal, ko bom velik, bom imel svoj električni avto. In verjeli ali ne, pred hišo stoji električni avto, ki so ga naredili takrat, ko je Janez bil že direktor. No, njegova pot potem je bila po svoje, tudi naprej je bila po svoje zelo zanimiva. Seveda je bil izjemno vpet v mednarodni prostor. Polovico časa je prebil pri kolegu Majerju v Štutgartu, polovico tukaj pri nas. Jaz mislim, da je njegov avto najpogosteje prečkal Ljubelj, da je poznal pot prav gotovo avto na pamet, ne samo Janez. In ko je postal direktor inštituta, kar je bilo za njega dokaj neobičajno, se nikoli ni kazal nekega posebnega interesa za predlaganje papirjev, je na tem inštitutu še močneje zavel duh Max Planckovega inštituta. Mogoče včasih celo mičkan preveč hladno, mičkan premočno za koga se, ampak dosledno je bil ta duh. Janez je bil veliko tudi na različnih drugih univerzah, dlje časa je delal na Los Alamosu laboratoriju in na Cornell univerzi in ves čas je dosledno delal na tistih področjih, ki so se kasneje iz primarnih sistemov baterijskih razvil v sekundarne in danes, kakorkoli vpračamo, lahko vsi skupaj s ponosom rečemo, na Kemijskem inštitutu smo pred 35 leti zastavili osnove laboratorija za elektrokemijske izvore energije, za litijeve akumulatore in danes kogarkoli v Sloveniji, pa tudi skoraj v Evropi, vprašate, kdo za to skupino Ljubljana. Nikoli ne bom pozabil Janeza, ko je že kot uveljavljen raziskovalec prišel k meni z enim samim diagramom in rekel, lej, MIT smo premagali, Berkeley smo premagali. In rekel, čak, kaj ste premagali? Šlo je za to, da je bilo treba narediti litij železo fosfata, ne manjem kot katodni material, in da so ta material takega, kot so naredili, preizkusili. Mislim, da je bilo na 5 ali 6 različnih laboratorijih po svetu, da so preizkusili njegove lastnosti in material, ki je bil narejen v Ljubljani, je imel najboljše elektrokemijske lastnosti med vsemi preizkušenimi materiali. Povedal sem vam, zraven sta bila MIT in Berkeley. In tak je bil naš Janez. Bil je izjemno skrben oče. Klara je imela očeta, ki takih ni veliko. In pogosto smo se pogovarjali tudi o tem, Tatjana, in ga občudovali, kako je znal v bistvu se iz laboratorija preseliti domov in tako je priklopiti na svojo malo princesko. In tudi iz tega aspekta je bil izjemen človek. In na koncu lahko rečem samo to, ko človek pomisli nazaj, ko se vpraša, kakšno je bilo življenje, ki se ga živel pravzaprav, to ni sosledje nekih fotografij, sosledje nekih spominov, ampak je predvsem tisto, kar si zapomnil, kar te neprestano spominja. In tisto, kar mene neprestano spominja na Janeza, je doslednost. Dosleden je bil pri vsaki svoji stvari. In če bi moral koga iskati in mu reči, ta je pa med vsemi, ki jih poznam najbolj dosleden, je bil to Janez. Bil je tako dosleden, da je prišel, sta se pogovarjala, prišel k meni, pa sta nekaj govorila, pa je rekel, šef, ne vem, zakaj sem me klical šef, rekel, a ste prebral ta članek? Sem rekel, ne, nisem še prebral. A je rekel, potem pa najprej preberite ta članek, pa se pa naprej. In to vsem hočem povedati, da smo imeli delovno vzdušje in verjamem, da je tako vzdušje danes veliki skupini v primerjavi s tistim majhnim jedrom in zelo sem ponosen, da smo to skupino pred 35 leti zastavili in danes, kakorkoli pogledate, je prav gotovo prihodnost električnega avtomobila, pravzaprav prihodnost energije kot tehnologije, ne več kot načina pridobivanja, prihodnost energije kot načina življenja, tista, ki brez tega dela, ki se opravlja v tem laboratoriju, ne bi bila mogoča. Zato, Janez, hvala.
Hvala, lep govor. Na konec tega prvega uradnega dela, ki se potem nadaljuje z znanstvenimi predavanji, mi bo še veliko čas, da podelim izdajo, svečano izdajo, ki je že nekako narejena.
Samo eno besedo v tej priliki. Želim vam povedati iz prve roke, da vse, kar je Janez delal, je delal s srcem. Hvala vam za vaš trud, ki ste ga vložili v pripravo tega nesmrtnega spomina na. Verjamem, da bo hčerki Klari to eden najdragocenejših spominov.
Now to announce our distinguished guest, Professor Joachim Meyer for Max Planck Institute in Stuttgart. Janez, as you heard, spent with him almost 8 years, if I'm correct. And today he will present us some parts of his research and research which is connected with Professor Jannik's work. Please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For me to be here, it's really a must, I must say. And it's a wonderful idea to have such a science day centering around Janez Jannik, and also even having an issue in the Acta Chemica Savenica. So I also contributed to it, and I was happy to do so. And my talk also will be dealing with this special topic, which is also outlined in the issue, electrochemical circuit elements. Because this is it's mirroring one of the facets of Janez Jannik's work very nicely. He spent part of his PhD thesis with us in Stuttgart, as Professor Jannik already had explained. This is a picture in 1993, the 7th floor of the Max Planck Institute. After having done his thesis, he spent also time as a postdoc with us. And we had every year excursions, for example here in Austria, Maria Farr 1997. This is also by accident, or not by accident, he is the center of the picture. And next to him is Professor Werner Sitter. You may remember him, he was a host at that time in Maria Farr, our workshop. On this side is Professor Jürgen Fleig, he is in Vienna now. You may also realize Amita Chandra from India, she was a guest with us. She also shared for a while a room with Janez. And she wrote a very touching email after said, "Dad, I just will read it. Dear all, it is with great sadness that I join all of you in sharing my grief on the passing away of our dear brother Janez. Like most or all of you, I had the opportunity of having discussions with him on many topics, traveling with him to the Solid Psionics conference in Greece, sharing an office, on one brief visit to Stuttgart, having him in India, and the list goes on. Intelligence is what he was born with, while wit and humor was what he had cultivated." One can almost hear his aha. So this is a thesis of him, and Professor Jannik explained how everything originated. It was with this battery, obviously, as he showed. He was interested in also interfaces in batteries, and in lithium chloride, which is formed at the interface, space shock zones, obviously. And that was our favorite in Stuttgart, and I'm very grateful to Professor Jannik that he then made this kind of link to us. And out of this PhD thesis, various influential papers then originated. And this thesis showed the wide span of his work, because he was on one side very much interested in fundamentals, so he was deeply going into the theory of impedance spectroscopy. But having done this, he then was proposing a method for detecting buried interfaces by impedance spectroscopy. And having done this, he even applied it to a specific example of silver chloride. And then when he stayed as a postdoc, I must actually say I was really shocked when I saw this kind of class later, which had at that time a different meaning. He did very nice work later as well. And one of, probably the major one, is dealing with electrochemical circuit elements, which is partly done in this paper here. And this is because electrochemical circuit elements are somehow in the center. They can be linked with a heat theory, where he was very much interested in, And on the other hand, they can be used in almost an ad hoc way in explaining complex practical situations to a surprising degree. So my talk, and I apologize if some parts are a little technical, but this also belongs to this work, deals with chemical capacitances and generalized resistors in these kind of networks. And you know that normally electrical circuits are described by resistors and capacitors. Inductivities are not so important in this context. Now this has to be generalized. When you have an oxide, any oxide, like almost any crystal, every crystal I must say, has a certain width of stoichiometry. It's not so that maybe zinc oxides always zinc 1 or 1. There is always a certain range. And this may not be very large. This is a phase diagram. And you can go through that width when you change the oxygen partial pressure in the surrounding. What happens inside, you don't need to follow this, these are the typical diagrams. They show how largely ionic and electronic carrier concentrations change inside. So this is almost dramatic in terms of these kind of issues, even though at this ppm you couldn't even waves sometimes. For the electrochemistry is of prime importance exactly where you are. So you have always to define, for example, the oxygen partial pressure in an oxide. So I give you an abstract but also vivid example of what is a chemical capacity. So when you deal with such an oxide, what you then do, you have to define the temperature, you have to define the pressure, you have to define the actual partial pressure. But when you have an oxide such as barium titanate or strontium titanate, then the oxygen sublattice can be reversible, but strontium and titanium, they are not, they are just fixed. So I'm sure that Johannes Jannik would have liked this approach here. I said we are referring to TP mu1 N2 ensemble, the statistical ensemble, temperature, pressure, chemical potential, and these are standing for the mole numbers of the ones that are not reversibly exchanged. Now anyway, however it is, you can define a characteristic thermodynamic function which depends on internal energy, entropy, and so on, in such a way. And this is interesting because any of these terms that appear in that variation, they refer to a capacitance. You see, this volume is obviously the first derivative of this function, which characterizes this statistical ensemble with pressure. The second derivative would be the derivative of the volume with regard to pressure. This is a compressibility. This is a mechanical capacitance. In the same way, when you do the same analysis, this part gives a thermal capacitance, and this term here gives you the chemical capacitance. It describes how much particle number is varied when you change the chemical potential, which is the oxygen partial pressure that's around. So, more vivid is this example. This is Professor Werner Zitter. He volunteered in showing what a chemical capacity means. You offer chemistry, you offer food. Now the question is, how much can you store? Some people have a large chemical capacity, typically regrettable people, others have not. It's just left as a resistance of the food going through. This is what is behind it. How much you can store when you change chemistry, how much a mole number you store. Not like an electrical capacitance only when you say how much charge you can store when you change the electrical potential. How much can you store in terms of particles when you change your chemistry and so on. It's a very simple point of view. So here the chemical capacitance is very small because you cannot store a lot when you change your partial pressure. So my talk will be divided in two parts. The first part I will deal with these kind of questions where you have small storage, but more with questions, what is a consequence of these kind of variations of composition inside. The second part I then deal with the situations where you have a large storage. This has to do with stoichiometric polarization. It's one of the major how to say, topics that Ian Sender was interested in studying. So it's about resistors and capacitors. Now we are dealing with a mixed conductor. A mixed conductor is a general material that does not only have an electronic conductivity like a metal semiconductor, it has also ion conductivity. This is a general case. It's not a special case, it's general. Now you are subjected to some driving forces, some voltages, but not only electric, but also chemical effects outside. It's an extremely general case. So what about the resistor? It can be shown that the resistor, this generalization is simple, because you just say, instead of saying we have the voltage, we are also having a chemical driving force. So in formal terms, this can be done by generalizing the electrical potential to the so-called electrochemical potential. It's pretty simple. Capacitance is more difficult because what you normally have in a capacitor is a dielectric effect. You polarize your material inside. Now this chemical capacitance is something different because you store something. So they are separate. They cannot be so simply connected. And this is one of his papers where it was shown how they can be arranged in a very general way. So here the ions flow. These are ionic resistors. You have these generalized resistors to take. And these are the electrons flowing along an electronic rail. And then we have the capacitors, that is called a dielectric displacement rail. We have the displacement current polarization inside. But now we also have them, you can see in this direction, these chemical capacitors. Whenever, namely, an ion and an electron meet, they form a component. Lithium does electrons, they form a lithium. Then change your composition. So the composition changes can then be very nicely implemented by these kind of chemical capacitors. So in a way, this is a spatial variation here, the position, and this here has to do with the chemical changes. So let's now consider a mixed conductor, so a material that has ionic and electronic contributions, not only electronic contributions of ionic contributions. And you have it in between two electrodes, like metals or so, or graphite, which only let through the electrons. What is the consequence? The consequence is the electrons can go through, the ions cannot. So the ions will try to pile up on one side, and they will be depleted on the other side. This is happening in the bulk, where there are no charging. Everything is compensated by electronic carriers inside. So what you have is a variation of the stoichiometry inside. So you get really a gradient of your composition inside. That is a general response of a mixed conductor. It is shown a very old example, silver telluride, where you have pretty high silver ion conductivity and also some electronic. Now when you switch off on your current, your voltage jumps to this voltage. This voltage is given by the resistance, the total resistance, ions and electrons, initially, both contribute. But then in the course of time, the ions are blocked. And in the steady state, you have only the electrons going through that system. So this distance and that distance, they tell you how much electrons and ions you have in the system. So here you have probably 80% ionic conductivity and maybe 20% electronic. When you switch off the current, everything goes back. The time dependence immediately, this is determined by the so-called chemical diffusion coefficient. It's the most important diffusion coefficient that you have in terms of chemistry. Whenever something is transport controlled, and you change your composition, then it's a chemical diffusion coefficient. Just to be taken. This depends on ions and on electrons. Both have to cooperate. So you can also do the following. You can plot, for example, now the electrons. And this is particularly good if you have a material which is a very, very good electronic conductor, like these kind of superconductors. So when you block the electrons by switching in zirconium oxide, which is a very good oxygen conductor, then you just do the opposite. When you drop the electrons in steady state, you have separated out your ions. Looks like a very simple method, but practically it's very complicated because you have to seal. These are the different phases here. You have to seal this with respect to the outer oxygen atmosphere. When the oxygen has excess, then it will directly level out the gradients you need to build up inside. It's practically speaking, it's not so trivial. So what was the first order understanding that we had in terms of these equivalent circuits? This is an equivalent circuit of such a sample. You have ions and electrons, the resistors. But usually you can separate them. They appear together as a total resistor. And this is directly capacitance. This may be standing for, let's say, internal grain boundary effects interface. Now you switch on a current, such a system. The time dependence is typically then determined by the capacitance, not by the resistors. If you only had resistors, you directly get the result. The capacitors moving out, and the time dependency is certainly with capacitors. Now, the capacitors here, fortunately, are very different. The dielectric capacitor is very small. The typical measure these like picofarads. These interfacial ones are maybe microfarad because the interfaces are thin. And even much larger is the chemical capacitance. It's a very, very large capacitance, maybe millifarad, orders of magnitude larger. Now, when you do these kind of things, then according to the time resolution that you have, you get different responses. And when you go to very, very long times, then this capacitor is active. It's blocking the ionic resistor. It's blocking the ionic path. It's ionic rail. And only the electrons are going through. And then it's the polarization just shown. With this, we later term the chemical capacitor. And it's not a simple capacitor. It was also known in literature. It's what people call a transmission line, because you make a diffusion inside, you change things locally. So it cannot be a simple circuit convenience. It must be this kind of modus rail. So how everything has to be connected, that was done in the next work very nicely. They already mentioned it. Ionic rail, electronic rail. These are the chemical capacitors, and then you can describe, once you have accepted this, describe almost very complex situation in very, very simple way. Really nice. I'll give you some examples here. I only want to show here at that point that this kind of mixed conducting work is also extremely important. It's almost, whenever you have some ionic motion, in the long run, most materials you have some ionic motion. This matters. So I'll give you a recent example that we have been interested in. And this has to do with titanium oxide, which is a photovoltaic element. As you may know, you take your titanium oxide, you illuminate it, you create electrons and holes. And if you can separate them, the holes can do oxidizing work, and the electron can do reducing. So you can convert light into something that you can store. And in order to get a good efficiency, people use dyes. They covered the titanium with dyes, which efficiently absorbs the light. But more recently, there's a lot of literature now on perovskites instead of these dyes, inorganic materials, and the efficiency went up quite a degree. And but people not only reported better efficiency, they also said there are a lot of strange things going on. They call it anomalies. Such anomalies have been, for example, the dielectric constant appeared to be very high, but only at low frequencies. People thought this must be a sign of ferroelectricity, but naturally it's not ferroelectricity. Second, when you do this kind of sweep experiments, so electrochemists do kind of current ramp, increasing the current with the voltage, then they decrease it, red, and And then they found that hysteresis that they could not explain. So we thought this is all very much characteristic of a mixed conductor under phases which do block the ions. Normally you don't care about ions, so your phases that you have left and right of this perovskite, they are just electronic conductors. They would block the ions. So we took this equivalent circuit, simplified version here. This is capacitance, a function of frequency. Sorry for this misprint here. That is for specialists a real part of the complex capacitance. Anyway, it goes up. This is a bulk value here, and this is a chemical capacitance. So it's a chemical capacitance which makes this very high value. When you do this kind of speed experiments, this is hysteresis. It's just coming through this equivalent circuit. And then we did the following. We took this material, this methyl ammonium lead iodide. We plugged in between two graphite electrodes. We switched on a current. Then you saw this series polarization curve, which tells you, when you compare this to this, that the material is primarily an ionic conductor. Also electron conductor, you can primarily an ionic conductor. And then if you evaluate this kind of transient, then you can do this also very nicely. Anyway, this material is simply about the anomalies are just normalities when you consider this as a mixed conductor. And these are the strange diagrams. I don't want you to follow it. This is a normal effect diagram for perovskite. You don't have to deal here with oxygen vacancies, you have iodine vacancies. These iodine vacancies are the ionic carriers. Then you have electron vacancies, the holes, to consider. And you change here when you go through the phase with the iodine partial pressure. So when the iodine partial pressure is increased, you fill your iodine vacancies, so you decrease your ionic conductivity. But iodine is incorporated as iodide, so it takes two electrons, so you increase the hole concentration. So electron concentration, electron conductivity goes up, ion conductivity goes up. This is very simple. But it's hard to bring this over to the community that are not thinking in terms of mixed conductivity. So this was a time picture. You can do the same with frequency when you do impedance spectroscopy. Jan Sjajnik was really a master of impedance spectroscopy. Now I have here the translation of that semicircle, or of this equivalent circuit in terms of frequency. These are the usual plots. You take the impedance, the complex impedance, you plot the imaginary part, the negative imaginary part versus the real part. And then for any RC circle, you don't get these kind of tiny areas, you get a semicircle. This bulk, this interface, the grain boundary, and the interesting part, this stoichiometric polarization is here. So here you get the total resistance, which is ions and electrons in parallel, and at the very end you get the non-clocked one, the electronic resistor left. The frequency dependence now is corresponding to the time dependence. So previously, it's not an unusual semicircle because this capacitor is not an ideal capacitor. Remember this transmission line characteristic. This is giving rise to this what's called Warburg impedance, 45-degree increase. So this is the same as the square root T law in diffusion in the time domain. So this, these two publications, Professor Bionic here as a co-author, resolve a riddle, a long-standing riddle in the context. I will explain you at least the riddle. So when you have an ion conductor, or purely ionically conducting material, and you put it between two metals, between two electrons, so this is behaving as a capacitor. There's nothing going through, it's behaving as a capacitor. If you ask someone, electrical engineer, he will say, oh, this comes out. This is a bulk, high frequencies where you don't perceive this kind of clocking effect, and then this is just a capacitor. This is what you can say is a huge sinusoid which is infinitely large, and your diameter, which finally ends up in the electronic resistance, is just infinitely large. This is a typical capacitor function. But when you ask someone who is familiar with mixed conductivity, he will say, oh look, mixed conductor gives this, I just explained to you, this electronic resistor. Now he makes the electronic resistor infinitely large with a huge semicircle, but not the same result, because here it starts with 45 degrees, here it starts with 90 degrees. It's very, very contradictory. So the solution is very easily seen in this circuit. Namely, it has to do with the fact that in both pictures, space charge effects have been included. So that at the boundary, your ions can pile up a little and deplete a little, but not being compensated by electrons. The space charge indifference. And then you can explain what variations here in terms of the magnitude of the chemical capacitance versus space charge. Another riddle. It has to do with grain boundaries. Now, the grain boundary, you have all sorts of space charges. We have seen with many, many examples. When you take baryon time, Strong's these grain boundaries are the regions that paste together to crystallize in a stone, polycrystal ceramic. They are all charged. And here is an example that we typically see that this grain boundary is positively charged. It has some negative things are missing, oxygens are missing. And if this boundary is charged, negative, positive charge, all the positive carriers have to be, for electrostatic reasons, be depleted. So there are two carriers which are positively charged. These are the oxygen vacancies, two missing O2-. It's like a positively charged missing situation. And we have missing electron, which is a hole. Both are depleted. But it's important to see that the vacancies are much more strongly depleted than the holes because of the double charge. And this goes exponentially. It's really a huge difference. So what would you expect in terms of complete spectroscopy? At very high frequencies, you don't see interfaces. You would see the bike symmetries. At lower frequency, you would see this kind of interfacial effect. You would see this. Fits very nicely. But now there is a third one. This third one, you see, it starts with 45 degrees. You would think, oh, this is polarization because of the electrodes. But the electrodes we are using are completely reversible. There's no doubt. And it would not fit. What is the reason for this dropping? This was now Yannick's idea. He said, look, if these grain boundaries are a little blocking for the electrons, but much more blocking for the ions, they behave like electrons inside. They block the ions. They don't let through any ion. And indeed, this was the explanation. And when you do some optical experiments, these are tri-crystals, 1, 2, 3 crystals with contact grain boundaries, and the color changes here are indicative of this kind of polarization. So that the polarization, depletion, accumulation that occurs at the grain boundary. So the grain boundary inside, on the long run, gives rise to such situations. The third example. Now, the experiment is very simple. We do only chemistry. So we take our oxide, we change the oxygen partial pressure, and we look how this stoichiometry inside changes. We understand this very well. This is characterized at time behavior is characterized by chemical diffusion. We know what is in the chemical diffusion. You have contribution of ions and electrons, because you need both. Oxygen goes in, you need ions and electrons to move electroneutrally inside. So you have ionic and electronic contributions, you have ionic and electronic concentrations. On the other hand, for diffusion theory, it's known that the diffusion coefficient is inversely proportional to the time constant. And importantly, you have the size of your system to the square. So when you have a large size material, it takes very, very long. And a small one, it goes very quick because it's very sensitive dependence. Relaxation time can be formally written like normal circuits like RC. resistor times capacitor. This gives a time constant. Now we take the chemical resistor and the chemical resistor. And the chemical resistor is obviously this, and the chemical capacitor is obviously that. So this is pretty clear. Now let's see what is going to happen when you have a complex situation. You take a ceramic material, you take a polycrystal, this trains, and train boundary is separated. What if this train boundaries are very, very fast? They conduct, or they bring the oxygen directly to the small crystals. Very, very fast. Then your time constant will be determined by the diffusion of such a small train. So it will be determined by the chemical resistance of the train, by the chemical capacity of the train, but the geometry is very different. And then you directly get the result. More interestingly is the opposite case, when the train boundary now is blocking, blocks the motion. If this is so, then the chemical resistor is determined by the train boundary, but your chemical capacitor, its uptake, is still determined by the body. Just see how you handle the circuit. You get immediately the result. So it's not important that you understand the details, but rather how quickly, in an ad hoc way, playing around with the circuit elements to get the result. This brings us a little apart from what I want to say, so I'll just mention it, because this is probably the highest influence of this work was in fuel cell kinetics. In fuel cell, you have, for example, an oxygen conductor, hydrogen, oxygen, and a lot is going on at the interfaces. Oxygen, gas phase, the gas molecule is absorbed, is associated, it's ionized, and so on. Hydrogens are the same. It's a very complex, manifold steps. So again, repeat spectroscopy is very helpful. It may look surprising. We had a technical experimental setup that was done by Jürgen Fleig. At that time, he was a fellow PhD student, a very good friend of Nancy Yanni. He did this kind of experimental approach, and the evaluation was according to the equivalent circuit, and you get very nice results from amplitudes. It's a bit surprising. So how can, when you have maybe an absorption which is radiating, how can this be mirrored in impedance spectroscopy? That's very strange. But it's simple, because when your absorption step, for example, is very sluggish, the current that you can draw through the filter is very small. So it must be expressed electrically as well. And this is done by this chemical capacitor. The second part, look into some systems where the energy storage is very large. This is typically what you have in a battery. Then you're not content with having a very, very small variation, very small uptake of something. You want a big uptake of lithium, for example, the electron. So this is a battery, this is your electrolyte. Now, in contrast to fuel cell, you store your material here and there. So this uptake must be very large. And this again can be mimicked by this kind of circuits. First, real mapping in terms of complete spectroscopy, I'm seeing what your next papers. The ions move in this direction. They are blocked here. The electrons come from here. They're blocked there. And in between, you can store lithium, and this is again taken account of details again. Don't look at the details, just if you realize how interesting it is. And finally, there is a capacitive response, because you cannot draw a steady state current through a battery without changing composition. Because of that very sensitive dependence of the kinetics on the size, people use electrodes, electrode particles that are very small. And this is a pretty influential paper, because it dealt at early times with non-crystallinity effects in this battery. And already here you see some basic storage mechanisms. This is the storage of lithium and electrons in an electrode, the normal chemical capacitance effect, if you want, you store it inside. But you can also form, when your storage capability is done, another phase, which has a higher lithium content. And you can store lithium at interface. We later call this job sharing mechanism. Imagine you have two phases. One phase stores lithium plus, the electron is stored on the other side. Then you can store a monolayer, at least of lithium at the interface. So there is now very significant research activity in our department dealing with these kind of questions. Because they somehow have the possibility to reconcile the problems of power density, how fast you can store something, and energy density, how much you can store something. This is blue and the red phase. Both of these cannot store lithium. Lithium storage means lithium plus and the electron. In many phases it cannot do both. But there may be a phase which can store the electrons, and another phase that can store the ions only. You put them together, you get storage. He described the situation thermodynamically very nicely, and in most cases the voltage is given by this simple expression. So there is one term which looks like a normal electrostatic capacitor, voltage proportional to charge. But then you have another one that looks more like what you expect from chemistry. It's logarithmic variation. And that's actually what you configuration effect. So when you now express it in terms of lithium activity, which is the exponential of this, you have a power law, and you have this is the exponential. Now this exponential term is negligible whenever you have a small storage. You expect a power. An example, nickel lithium chloride stores some lithium. You cannot store lithium nickel, you cannot store lithium chloride, but you can. And this gives rise to a power law when you plot this charge with regard to voltage, and the power is very close to 1/4 what you expect. Another example, ruthenium lithium oxide. Here you can store a lot. So because then the exponential term is important, you will not have a power law, but then you exploit the whole equation. Then you can go through various examples and you can show how they have done. It's also important. More important here, this materials combination can always do hydrogen. Not a big amount, but it's interesting. You cannot store in this temperature range hydrogen with ruthenium and lithium oxide. With a composite, can. You need here with a composite, with lithium oxide, with ruthenium, they do not, but the composite stores quite an extent. I mean, it's so large. It's interesting, and you can store it either by H plus electron or by H plus H minus. So we did a lot of experiments which are at least consistent with this explanation, and the power law tells us it is stored as H plus H minus. So as nice as these things look, they are not very satisfactory. Everything is extremely sluggish because lithium oxide is a very, very bad conductor. So then, recently, this is my last example. We went to a material which is very well conducting, which is lithium silver iodide. This is so-called super ion conductor. Silver ions are heavily conducting, extremely well conducting. And graphite is a good element. So we made a composite. You cannot store silver in any of these materials separately. So you put them together. And then you can store it like that. Silver on one side, silver plus, electron on the other side. You can even tap it out. You can make vacancies on this side and hold it on that side. And this is extremely quick as well. This is a potential energy relation. This is a storage range. It is linear because this is more or less a rigid double layer situation for those who are interested. It's very quick. It's very quick. And this again has to do with the chemical capacitance and chemical resistance. The chemical resistance is given by ionic and electronic conductivities, and now the ions go the medium silver iodide way and the electrons go the graphite. They share it. And the capacitance is good because you have this space charge effects in addition to normal. So this is a picture how silver goes into the composite. You can have a diffusional path directly here, but you can also charge it from the material. Anyway, when you just concentrate on the diffusion aspect, the diffusion coefficient of this composite for silver is the highest chemical diffusion ever seen at room temperature. It's orders of magnitude higher than lithium, cobalt, for example, which determines the rate in which lithium is dissipated. It's even higher than sodium chloride liquid water. It's very, very high. But it's understandably high. I think we are on the right way of making what we call artificial mixed conductors. Namely then having alternating layers of good iron and good electron conductors. Thin film techniques, for example. I hope we will succeed in this. It's very similar to something that we did many, many years before, in 2000, where we had ion conductor interfaces done by a technique which is called molecular beam magnetics. MBE, some people call it mostly broken equipment, very complex technique. And then you get very high ion conductivities, and it took us one more decade to understand fully the effects. See again, Jensen was involved, even when he was, I think he was director at that time. He was still involved in collaborations, and so he is always around with us, still today. He was not only a great scientist, also he was a very social person. This is him when he was serving beer at the Institute canteen. And he normally, already said that we have excursions every year. We have a departmental excursion and meeting, sometimes in Lemberg or part of Tegernsee. And I was very grateful to him that he was, whenever he had time, he was with us. And he drove along with Gabacek and Domingo and others, and it was always very interesting. And it was a very sad day here in 2015 because this was shortly after this passing. And we thought, should we skip our normal Lemberg award? It means we have a riddle to solve, and then the best solution is then awarded by some prize. We said, no, it's probably more in his spirit if we do it like that. We take as a riddle this time, what would be the best text for generalized resistance and generalized capacity? In spirit. The prize was a bottle of red wine that I still had, was conveyed to you and some. And the first was Ljubljana, must have been 1993 or something. I gave two examples. These are two examples that I gave. One is called the Austrian chemical capacitance. This is this kind of digestion kinetics. You remember you supply your food and how much to store. The other one I called the German chemical capacitance. What you see nowadays in the Stuttgart is offered the closer track. It's not only the resistance that it increases, also you jam the capacitive. So this was an award winner, a PhD student. He came up with a simple text: I cannot resist handing something in, but lack the capacity to go. And the jury's justification was, Jans liked it. So he had certainly the capacity to do something good, and he did a lot of good deeds, not only scientifically, but also socially. He was a stipend, how interested he was in supporting young scientists. He could have done much more, and he would have done much more if his life had the dependence of friendship. But this is at the end. Have you got questions?
Thank you, Professor. So the lecture is now open for questions. Yeah, please. Yes.
Actually, I'm interested in two things. One is that it's too easy that you show due to chemical capacities.
This photographs,
Yeah. So you say that basically it is, I mean, it decreases the basic reason for this decreases is the chemical capacity.
yes.
So then we must have tried probably to change the volume of the and also concentration of the shark fishes. So you have very linear correlation.
And the volume, yes, the chocolate that you have the chemical presence proportional to the volume.
Yeah.
That's what we see as well.
So you put this in this way as well. Okay, so that's really very good.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I can see the papers.
I mean, it's for people who have some idea about these things, it's not unexpected at all. But when you talk to people from the community,
Yeah.
it takes a while to bring together communities sometimes. And this was also one of the characteristics of the language. It was very interdisciplinary, and that's what is needed.
And maybe you can mention just towards the end, you measured this really very high fusion coefficient.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, how exactly do you measure that? Because sometimes we have some problems with
I mean, the experiment itself is simple. You just make a composite and you make a titration, pretty much a titration. Look how quickly it diffuses it. What we also did, we applied some silver on the outside and some distance. We looked at how fast that silver signal, or how rapidly it has penetrated. But there is another problem here, which is tricky. It's not a simple diffusion, because you could also charge this capacitor at just bulk pathways. So it could be that your silver ion will be a thick sample. If your silver ions is going through the bulk, and the electrons are going through the bulk, and they charge it. You don't need the diffusion path. But you can calculate it first of all. Second, it is so, there is a very interesting circumstance in these cases. You have a special kind of a growth mechanism. What you see is, you have your graphite. It's a very long story. And then you have rubidium silver iodide crystals. And then you have almost a monolayer, a double layer of rubidium silver iodide covering it. This is what Substanzkrieg cluster. So you really see these things very, only one or two layers, and it's very pretty.
Maybe I can continue here. Stop sharing chemical infusion. Can you estimate the distance of those two phases? Is it relative really far, or is there any limitation from the grain boundary, how far you are, but you stop sharing the stuff?
So as I said, this is actually the experiment so that your graphite layer is pretty thick, and the rubidium silver iodide layer is very thin. It's melted on, and you have some crystallines here and there. And then connection is done with only a few layers of rubidium silver iodide.
Basically, this can explain some processes going on in batteries that we are not understanding well.
Maybe. Yeah. So we are not far from the situation. We have graphite thinner, and it was maybe more defined geometrically, you almost have the solution.
Is there any other question? So I would like to thank you once again. Next talk will be given by our colleague, Boštjan Gregorio. He will present his work, which is somehow dedicated to his time when he was working in our department. And the title of his talk is surface modified catalysts based on platinum, selectivity, stability, and activity.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It is a great honor and a privilege to talk here at this first Jamnik Symposium, because I was his PhD student. Actually, officially, I was his first PhD student that graduated under his mentorship. When Robert invited me to talk about something, I was thinking a lot, what should I talk about? So, and then at the end, I decided that I would talk about the work that actually started here at the National Institute of Chemistry, but then I continue this work at the Rice University in Houston, Texas, and then Argonne National Lab in Chicago, also the United States. Some part was done also in collaboration with Center of Excellence, and also the University of Ljubljana Faculty of Chemistry, Chemical Technology, where I work right now. So if you look at the title, is there a pointer? So if you look at the first line of the title, it says surface modification. So surface modification was actually our common denominator with Professor Jamnik. But that was surface modification on macroscopic level. So let me corroborate this with the following slide. Okay, yeah, that works. Thank you. So, the macroscopic surface modifications. Today we talk a lot about Professor Jamnik and his scientific achievements, but we haven't touched one of his, also I would say, very great achievements here at the National Institute of Chemistry. So if I explain this project that was led by him, I was just part of a smaller group working also on this project. So I would show you first the surface, because we're talking about surface specification. So this was the surface, which was later modified with the building. And I hope that you scientists here at National Institute, you're aware of the privilege to work here in this beautiful modern building. So it's actually Professor Jamnik's, all the credit goes to him, because this was kind of a Slovenian record. So this project was done from the idea to the realization, so moving in, actually the science moved in just 3 years. So now if I move to the surface modification on the atomic level, so I have to show you first this scheme. So materials can be modified in the bulk by doping, but I don't mean this doping which you see in the news, like when the athletes are doping. This is doping they use in semiconductor industry, and intercalation. Intercalation, you do that every day when you charge and discharge your phone. But I'm kind of more interested in surface modification, where you can modify edges, terraces, defects, steps, etc. And the reason why I'm more interested in this, because this is kind of more intriguing. That was also figured out by a famous scientist, Pauli Vichest, who said that God made the bug and the surface was invented by the devil. So, because of this, because surface modification makes some special properties or introduce some special properties into the system, I have to first show this image. So basically, what does the surface modification do? Surface modification changes the interface between the material and the surrounding, which can be gas, liquid, or solid. But in this case, I wanted to show you, because you also see in my title that I will talk about stability, activity, and selectivity. I have to incorporate these terms into this image. So when we modify material, in this case with organic molecules, we form kind of bond, and then these molecules act as a spacer and they have terminal functional group. So these two, spacer and terminal functional groups, are very important for the selectivity and the activity. But for the stability, bond is very important and gives the special property. So we can absorb molecules or modify surface by physisorption and chemisorption. So you can see from this diagram that chemisorption, if we absorb molecules via this mechanism, the bond is much more strong compared to physisorption. So physisorption is usually like van der Waals interaction or dipole-dipole interaction, while in this case we're talking about covalent modification. So in our case, we were dealing with the platinum. And why is platinum so interesting? It's because it's active material in the PEM fuel cells. I know that many of our colleagues here are working in PEM fuel cell field, but anyway, for those who don't, I will quickly explain what is PEM fuel cell. So PEM fuel cell, it stands for polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell, and it's basically a thermodynamically open system where we convert chemical energy from the fuels, which is in this case hydrogen and oxygen, to the electrical energy. Basically, it's composed of anode, electrolyte, and separator, and the cathode. So why are we talking about fuel cells? You know, fuel cells are one of the alternative ways which could in the future change the automotive industry, and are probably, besides the battery, the best alternative that will change in the future. However, there are still few drawbacks in the fuel cell technology, and the two most common are the price and the lifespan of the material. So with other words, stability. So the stability of the material, of the catalyst, was our field of research. So when we talk about stability, we talk about dissolution of platinum, we talk about sintering of platinum, we're talking about the degradation of the support, and we talk about the thinning of the polymer membrane, etc. I could go on. But however, we focused on the degradation of the support, because there was old problem with start and stop operation of a fuel cells that we have tackled. So before I start to talk, we have to ask ourselves the following questions. So where, when, and why the degradation of the support is happening? So the first question, where, I will tell you it's happening on the cathode side. When, I already told you that it's happening during the start and stop of the fuel cell, and at the end, why? I will show you that with the next slide. So when we stop, for example, the fuel cells, for the short time, there is an imaginary line that separates oxygen and hydrogen, because we are blowing oxygen through the anode compartment. And when that happens, this imaginary line triggers the reaction on the other side of the compartment, on the other side of the fuel cells, on the cathode compartment. And usually we can reach the potentials on this side up to 1.4 volts, and that already triggers the carbon dissolution or carbon oxidation. And the reason why this happens is because the ionic conductivity of the protons are much higher in this way than this way. So how do we tackle this problem? How do we approach it to diminish this reaction? So that can be achieved by looking at this simple graphic. So we have two polarization curves. One is the cell hydrogen air cell, and the other one is carbon air cell. So if we go back, this is this part and this part. So how can we diminish the start and stop current which happens at the intersection of those two curves? Is that we hold this curve and we move it to the more positive potentials. So then the currents get smaller. The others, for example, have done this by changing the oxidation potential of carbon, more or less successful, but we tackle this problem differently. We touch this part, air cell. So we tried to make the anode selective, so that there will be hydrogen oxidation reaction which is happening when the anode would be intact, but on the other hand, we want to prevent that oxygen reduction reaction on the anode side will happen. So actually we basically deleted this curve, and by that we would prevent start and stop current to go on. So how did we do that? At the beginning I mentioned that most of these catalytic processes are happening on the surface. So our approach would be to modify surface. And we decided to modify surface with this very molecule, which is trivially called calixarene. And the reason why they call it calixarene is because it reminds us of the shape of the chalice, and actually calyx is the Greek word for chalice. But if we want to modify surface and we want to make the system very stable, we have to attach it covalently to the surface of the platinum. So by that, we have to first functionalize our organic molecule with the appropriate functional groups that would act as anchors and would strongly bond to the platinum surface. So we designed a molecule which would have 4 tile groups on the upper ring. But however, it turned out that this was the hardest part of the work we were doing, and that was actually done here at the National Institute and the Rice University. So it took me actually 2 years to finally synthesize the desired molecule. And I remember one of our group meetings, Professor Jannik asked me when I was showing, all these reaction schemes with the cross. He asked me, so we've seen all these reactions. We know that you're working hard, and that idea is very good. But so when are we going to see the molecule you want to synthesize? I was so upset that time because I couldn't understand how someone can ask me when I will synthesize the molecule. If I knew, I would just write a recipe and give it to someone else to synthesize. But later, I realized that he wanted to ask me, there is a time in the science where you can stop working on certain problem because you have to graduate eventually. However, I was stubborn, and at the end, with the visit at the Rice University, which was also a big help, and Professor Jannik helped me to get there, I synthesized the desired molecule. And it turned out that stubbornness was, in this case, it was very good. So now we had molecules, synthesized molecules, the one we wanted. We isolated crystals big enough so we could determine that our molecule is really in the cone shape, because it's important that it's in cone, so it can attach on the surface with all 4 of the anchors. But once we had these molecules, we prepared, we had to modify the platinum surface. So we did that by self-assembly technique, and because we synthesized protected tile groups, we had to in situ deprotect it so that then the functionalization of the, or modification of the surface would be successful. And of course, then once we had these self-assembled monolayers, we wanted to fully characterize it before we went for electrochemistry and try our idea. So the first technique for the characterization of our self-assembled monolayers was ellipsometry, where we determined that, where we seen with the experiment that the thickness of our film was 1.2 nanometers, and when we compared it with the single height of one molecule, which is 1.1, we concluded that we actually have monolayers, that we don't have multi-layers, it's actually real monolayer. And then we continued with X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. With this technique, we of course quantitatively show that this molecule is really what it is, because it corresponded with the elemental analysis. But what was more important, we tried to figure out with how many anchors our molecules were attached to the platinum surface. So we did that by deconvoluting sulfur 2p signal, and we found out that in average per molecule 2.2 groups were bound and the rest were unbound and oxidized. And then when we knew that our system is really stable and robust, we moved to the well-defined single crystals and well-defined surfaces of platinum. So we did self-assembly on platinum 111 surface and look at under the STM microscope. The image revealed that our structure on the surface is really well organized. It forms arrays of clusters of our molecules, which are approximately 4.5 molecules, 4.5 nanometers in diameter. So once we had this system, we functionalized our platinum electrodes and did the electrochemistry to try out if our idea of introducing the selectivity really works. So at the beginning, we did first simple CV experiments, and we compared pure platinum with our functionalized or modified platinum surfaces. And you can see from the first CV that the difference between pure platinum, which is this dashed line, with the modified platinum is huge. You can see that pseudo-capacitive currents are mostly blocked in all three regions for the high UPD and OH adsorption. However, there is still some high UPD, and from the charge we calculated how much of our surface was actually covered. We figured out that we can cover maximum 98% of the surface, which left us with 2% available surface. So, and then after we know the coverage, we move to the next experiments, which are actually core and the basis of our idea. So we measured the Faraday currents for the hydrogen oxidation reaction and compared it with pure platinum, so modified platinum with pure platinum, and then we also did oxygen reduction reaction. And as you can see from these two plots, that in the case of the hydrogen oxidation reaction, we reach diffusion limiting currents with all of the modified platinum, while on the other hand, diffusion limiting currents cannot be reached for the oxygen reduction reaction, which you can see it's totally blocked. So this proved our concept that this molecule can act as a selective film on the platinum electron. So then we asked ourselves about the mechanism, because you've seen from here that actually high UPD is blocked, So it means that the hydrogen cannot penetrate through the molecule, through the cavity. But actually, when we try to explain this, we explained it with this simple scheme. So when we have hydrogen oxidation reaction, it is known from the literature that it is very fast reaction. And you need only a few places where this oxidation reaction happens. So kinetics is really fast. On the other hand, oxygen reduction reaction is very complex reaction and it needs a lot of space on the electrode to proceed. With other words, if I go to everyday life, so when we have hydrogen oxidation reaction, it's like you have 100 workers working at the highway, and only 2 of them can use all the material available for them, and they will use all the material, while the other 98 can just sit. But in the case of the oxygen reduction reaction, all 100 must work to use the material available. So this actually reminds me of the how actually work at our highways are going on. 2 are working and the rest are looking. Then we also, of course, because we have shown that this idea works on the well-defined surfaces, we have to try in the real systems, on the real catalysts that are used in the fuel cell. And we have shown that that works for the nanoparticles, real nanoparticles in the shape of the nano-whiskers, and also for the nanoparticles commercial in the shape of the kind of close to sphere nanoparticle. But now you've seen that I've shown you that we have selectivity and we have activity, but now you will ask me, what about stability? So with this experiment, we wanted to mimic the start and stop problems, because nowadays in the fuel cell community, it's the agency, the set goals are 5,000 hours. That fuel cell should work 5,000 hours. That corresponds to approximately 250,000 kilometers, and it should go on through 30,000 start and stop cycles. And in our case, we mimic this start and stop cycles by exposing our system to 60 degrees Celsius at 0.8 volts and saturated with the oxygen. And as you can see from the curve, during time, the current actually went down. And if our system were not stable, so if molecules were detaching during these conditions, actually current should go up. And even if you look at these Faraday currents for the ORR reaction before and after, you can see there is no difference between the before and after modified platinum electrodes. So, of course, because that worked for commercial system. Of course, we filed in a patent application, but however, the patent was later denied. Simply because in one of the papers which I authored, and that was my first paper, I stated, bound to noble metal surface, the salmon molecules are candidates to serve as molecular sieves for H2 molecules, and which could have relevance for fuel cells application. So by showing you that, I just want to encourage young colleagues and tell them, when you write papers, the take-home message is, less is more. So that was not very important for the paper, that actually wasn't. But I somehow, made problem. And why I'm showing you this, because in 2013, me and Robert went to Offenbach to the Honda R&D, and I had the opportunity to drive a fuel cell Honda Clarity, and I was talking to one of their research and development guy, and asked him, so are you testing these molecules for start and stop problems? And he just looked at me, smiled at me, and said, sorry, I cannot comment on that. And then his look he smiled. His comment told me everything that they're probably now already incorporating this stuff in the commercial fuel cells. But unfortunately, we didn't patent. We couldn't patent it. But now, lately, in the past 2 years, we returned back to this surface modification, but we moved from aqueous system to the organic system. And these systems could have a relevance more relevance in the battery community. So we also shown, I won't go too much into details, but I just want to show you again platinum. When we compared pure platinum with platinum modified with very well-defined graphene layers on the surface using CVD methods, that you can see that oxygen reduction reaction, which is one electron reaction. In this case, it goes from oxygen to superoxide. It's irreversible in case of platinum, while reversible in case of the modified platinum with the graphene. The reasons are because platinum, because it's very active, it forms SEI, which then blocks the reduction reaction, and it's irreversible. On the other hand, that does not happen with the graphene layer. At the end, of course, I would like to thank the founding, which is Slovenian Research Agency, for my young research team, but most of the funding, the credit goes to USA, to DOE and J. Caesar. And I would also like to thank the colleagues from the Argonne National Lab, Dusan, Nenad, and Justin, and Goran, and friends from the Price University, Professor Tur and Tal. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for excellent talk, and I'm sure that there are some questions from the public. I also encourage to write non-important things into the paper.
You commented on non-patenting your invention. How come?
Could you repeat it?
How come that you didn't patent your...
No, we filed patent, but then the patent was denied because, you know, the patent officer, they go through the patent application. When you apply, they go through these patent applications. If they see that it was already mentioned before in one of the publications, before you file the patent, you can't patent anymore because it's good for the everyone can use it once it's published.
So why wasn't the reverse respective patent version then published?
It is, but the guy found, you know, the simple sentence which has nothing to do with the idea in this. Found a patent that says these molecules can actually. One of the claims are, of course, the molecules. The molecules offer selectivity, and said in one of these papers, this was already mentioned.
I have a question. How do you define this sentence?
Yeah, because they read papers. It's their job. It's their job, actually. Two of my colleagues, when I was a postdoc at Rice University, two of the scientists went to the patent office and now work as a patent officer. So they're actually scientists that are reading this paper. It's not just simple lawyers.
I was just wondering, you went for thiol-based monolayers, yeah? Did you try any other molecules? Because, I mean, I'm asking this because I found research from 2013 where they used N-heterocyclic scorbane, not on platinum, but on gold. And they say, and I quote, bonds bound to gold, their N-heterocyclic scorbane are not displaced by thiols, thioreters, and are stable to high temperatures, boiling water, organic solvents, pH extremes, and electrochemical cycling above 0 volts. Does that come into consideration? I mean,
so, like when we were designing this molecule, of course there are many functional groups that attach to the noble metals. So, but the thiols are known to be one of the best, the bond that forms between the noble metal atom and the the tile group is one of the strongest. So that's why we went after these tiles. But of course we could also try others.
So if you just go back to that experience that you made, I mean, I have a picture, but your initial idea was to have Alex rings because they have this cavity, and then hydrogen will go through, and the other molecules which are bigger would not go through. But then now we see also hydrogen doesn't go through.
No.
So nothing goes through that. So
yeah, so you're probably asking how do we explain now this selectivity?
Yeah.
So these molecules are very rigid. So if I would go with simple monomers, these monomers would assemble much nicer on the platinum surface. So they could also cover then the steps and the defects. However, because our molecules are rigid, you can imagine they cannot nicely arrange in the very impermeable film. So that's why it leaves us with steps probably and a couple of defects, which are enough, the number of them is not big enough that this hydrogen oxidation reaction can work.
So then, if you use graphene or something else, would it be sooner? Or do you think that it has to be sort of selective towards covering?
I think we just hit the sweet spot with these molecules. With the graphene is also impermeable. Also, although they are showing now, there are a couple of papers that they will show that there is proton permeation through the graphene lattice. But however, I did not want to show our latest results because now we work a lot with the graphene, so I don't want another patent to get.
With that, I would like to thank Jan and all other speakers. We are continuing at 1 o'clock, this is predicted in the schedule, and all of you are invited for a small snack in Hawaii.